Welcome to the UofDigital Live podcast, where we break down major stories in marketing and advertising into easy to understand terms. We discuss interesting opinions, and we bring you, the audience, into the conversation. Enjoy. Let's get started. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So this is the first ever UofDigital Live episode. This is a live podcast where we are going to break down the biggest news in marketing and advertising, live with an audience, live with you all, and we're going to try to make sense of all of it together. So I'm your host, Shiv, and Myles. I'll turn it over to you. You're our co-host. You're Myles. You're our co-host. So let's jump in. We're going to have a few different sections. The first section, we're just going to break down what's happening. What is the news? So this may have come across your ticker this morning on your computer or on your phone, or you might have gotten blown up while you were in a meeting. That's what happened to me and David. But basically, Google posted this on their blog today, on the Privacy Sandbox blog, where they basically said they will no longer be putting out any kind of consent for third-party cookies, like a standalone consent prompt for third-party cookies in Chrome, like they announced they would last summer. So obviously Google has gone through a lot of different iterations and phases of what they're going to do as they phase third-party cookies out. Last summer, the kind of latest phase was, hey, we're not getting rid of third-party cookies entirely, but we are going to prompt everybody whether they want them or not very proactively. And now they're basically saying, we're not even doing that. We're going to kind of leave it up to the consumer if they want to go digging in their settings and they want to turn third-party cookies off. And it'll just be their choice if they want to go down that path. But otherwise, we're going to leave things as status quo. We're not really doing anything else around third-party cookies as of now. So that obviously means a bunch of things. One other piece of information that is interesting in this blog post is how they talk about Privacy Sandbox API. So Privacy Sandbox has obviously been the tool that they've developed with numerous APIs to kind of replace the functionality and use cases of third-party cookies. So they basically said in the last paragraph of this blog post, as you can see here, in light of this update, we understand that Privacy Sandbox APIs may have a different role to play in supporting the ecosystem. We will engage with the industry to gather feedback and share an updated roadmap for these technologies, including future areas of investment in the coming months. So I think that's very interesting because it kind of puts the future of Privacy Sandbox in limbo. I think, for all intents and purposes, that means we don't know if Privacy Sandbox will be a continued area of focus and investment for Google in the future. It could not, depending on the type of feedback that they're getting from the industry broadly. So that is the news. There's probably other aspects of it that maybe I'm missing. We're all trying to digest this in real time. That's what I've read so far from the blog post itself and from the Ad Exchanger article by Allison Shiv. Myles, do you think I missed any details in your reading of what's happening?
No, I maybe you did, but here's the thing. Like, how cryptic is this blog post? Like, let's just say you were wrong. I think you could be forgiven for being wrong, of like that you took the wrong things away from this. Like, scroll up, Shiv. The headline doesn't actually say anything. Doesn't just
It said next steps. Yeah, Myles, you don't like it when you get an email from a partner that says like, hey, should we get on a meeting and discuss next steps?
Yeah. Well, and then if you read the blog post, is it like paragraph 3 or 4 where they actually say what it is that is being announced about the there we go. It's the end of paragraph 3. They wait until the end of paragraph 3 to announce that they're not going to offer the user prompt. Anyway, Google's usually pretty clear with these blog posts. So this is just, I don't know. I find this unusual. I'm not 100% sure what to like take away from that. Like maybe it was a little rushed. I know Mathieu Roche, the CEO of ID5, mentioned like he didn't think it was a coincidence. He wrote a post on LinkedIn. He didn't think it was a coincidence that there was this sort of the DOJ ruling, and then this comes out like very, very quickly after. And so maybe this was rushed out, and that's why it's a bit ambiguous as to what exactly they're announcing, other than they're not going to do that user choice prompt.
Yep. And I think the other big kind of like obvious thing here is, we've been talking about signal loss. We've been talking about cookies going away for a long time. Even when they did the user prompt announcement last summer, we're like, oh, well, this still means cookies are going away for the most part. because, we're assuming that the prompt will look like maybe Apple's ATT prompt, where it's very aggressive and it kind of like pushes the user in one direction. But now they don't have a prompt. And so the whole discussion around signal loss, around cookies going away, kind of gets flipped on its head. And the question that I think a lot of people have been asking for years, which is like, are cookies actually going to ever go away? I think now the answer to that is maybe closer to no, than it ever has been, or that than it has been since 2019.
I think it is no.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think that's what they don't want to say here. Like,
Yeah. I hedged. Myles, I was hedging.
well, yeah. Anyway, I think everybody hedged a little bit. God, when even was it, Shiv, that they announced that they were going to do the choice prompt thing?
It was last summer,
Months ago.
like August, I think.
Ago.
I want to say.
Yeah. At least until Chrome is spun off. Um, uh, but yeah, it's difficult to really like read too much into this. The other thing I was going to bring up is that, I looked at the coverage in Ad Exchanger and Digiday, specifically, and unless I'm wrong, uh, it didn't seem like they had actually spoken to anyone at Google. It seemed like they were also just operating off of this blog post, which is also it's unusual. Feels
Mhm.
unusual for me for this kind of news to go out with this kind of significance, but with this level of ambiguity.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's get into some quick POVs. There's a bunch of different little angles and interesting things to unpack here. Myles, any interesting POVs you want to hit on first, or you want me to go first?
I mean, uh, I think privacy sandbox, there's elements of it that were always going to be a tall order. And so, it's been uh, it's this slow motion train wreck watching Google like slowly walk back from the original ambition of privacy sandbox, but it was always just going to be a really, really tall order. And I wish that this blog post kind of offered more insight into what the actual like future roadmap is, assuming they're just going to leave third party cookies kind of untouched from their current state.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's like a slower version of a train wreck though? We need a
Mm.
better analogy. Train wrecks happen instantly, Myles.
Yeah.
We need a
Cargo
5-year train
ships,
wreck.
cargo ships, like an oil tanker colliding with another oil tanker
Slowly.
in an ocean of syrup.
Okay. Other angles that I think might be interesting for us to discuss really quickly. So one is, I think this one's been talked about a little bit on social media already. Like, what does this all have to do timing wise, if anything at all, with all of the antitrust cases, right? So like right now, there's a bunch of remedies that are being discussed in the search case. Google was just found guilty, I want to say last week, for being an ad tech monopoly, specific to GAM and AdX. Um, does this, does this have anything to do with that? Do you think it impacts any of that at all? Any thoughts on that, Myles?
Well, like I talked to Marty Swant at Digiday last week about that ruling. And my take was, that the DOJ was simplifying things. I mean, there's many elements going on, but one of the things is that the DOJ may be trying to simplify things by just focusing on the sell side. So don't try to solve both sides of the two-sided market, buy side and sell side, simultaneously. Just focus on the sell side and like actually accomplish some things. This may be like Google's own version of decomplexifying this situation of just like, well, if we're going to be kind of fending off the DOJ and they're going to be picking apart, all these different aspects of our platforms and our technologies, do we want to still simultaneously be pursuing these really, really significant changes inside Chrome? And can we just kind of put a pause on some of that so that we can kind of assess things as they stand without kind of trying to hit a moving target.
Yeah, just to add to that, Apple, a month or two ago, was slapped with some kind of penalty, or I forget what the specifics are, but basically ATT, app tracking transparency, was deemed to be anti-competitive by European lawmakers and regulators. Because ATT obviously like sucks more oxygen out of the ecosystem, pulls more ad dollars into Apple's world. And so I wonder if Google is looking at that. Obviously they have commitments to the CMA. And they also have stuff going on with like how Privacy Sandbox is potentially anti-competitive. So to your point of simplifying their antitrust entanglements, like maybe this just makes things easier, which I think that makes sense. Um, Another angle I think that's interesting, Myles, is like you and I have talked about this a bit, of this concept of like, privacy has been moving forward full steam ahead for 5 years, 6 years. Like I'd say ever since GDPR, ever since really like Cambridge Analytica, right back in the mid-teens, the privacy movement began. Apple pushed it forward really aggressively. Regulators and lawmakers jumped on board, and we've just been on this crusade for that amount of time, moving forward pretty much all the time, right? And the industry obviously has developed all these different types of pets and clean rooms and ID solutions, et cetera, et cetera. And we've just been on this crusade moving forward. But it feels like for the first time in the last, let's say, 6 to 12 months, the privacy crusade has started to come up against some walls. It's hit some walls. So, like I just mentioned, the Apple ATT thing, that being anti-competitive, I think that was a big wall, right? For the privacy kind of movement and the privacy crusade. Another one was, Google, I think sometime in the last 6 to 12 months, rolled back kind of their heavy-handed approach in Google Marketing Platform to like obfuscating IP. There was a big thing about, oh, hey, now you can actually use IP, on Google ad tech properties and YouTube and things like that. I think that was an interesting moment that kind of showed that privacy is maybe hitting a wall. GDPR right now is under scrutiny in the EU as like, oh wait, this is maybe too aggressive and we need to roll it back. And so there's probably a couple of other examples. And actually this example today is the biggest example of like, the powers that be at Google are probably looking at all of this and saying, well, at this point, does it make business sense for us to continue down this path of maybe following Apple and being super aggressive and heavy-handed about privacy, or is it really necessary anymore because of all of this kind of geopolitical stuff that's happening? And I'm guessing the math on Google's side was like, no, it doesn't make sense anymore. Let's stop. And so I think that's fascinating because it's going to be interesting to see now if there's more whiplash. Like these are some examples of whiplash from the industry hitting some of these walls. What other kind of whiplash will there maybe be? Like, are we going to basically see like other browsers potentially backtrack, right? It's going to be interesting to see what Apple does. Like, is Apple going to stop running privacy ads everywhere all the time? Like, it's just going to be really fascinating to see all of the downstream kind of whiplash that comes out of this potentially.
What are any of us going to talk about online? Um, no, I agree. It feels like we're kind of reaching some sort of equilibrium state where there's multiple different fronts where they've just kind of pushed it to the limit of perhaps diminishing returns, if you will, of technical feasibility, of satisfying regulators, of, competitive advantage, things like this, of, consumer opinion, things like this, and it's all kind of reached maybe this equilibrium state. And I'll get back to the ambiguity of this blog post is Google was always very, very clear in past years about some next thing that they were announcing, and this blog post kind of just sort of pumps the brakes on something that was already a hedge, like that cookie prompt was already a hedge, and so they're just pumping the brake on the hedge. And then this blog post just kind of talks about other stuff that was already in process. So it's like even this blog post has nothing new to say. It's like the steamroller has just sort of ground to a slow halt, and it's just like, well, we have nothing left to tell you. We launched all the features.
Um, I'm gonna take a big L on this whole thing. By the way, I'm gonna take a huge L because I have been in the camp of I think Google's highly motivated to deprecate cookies. privacy is a little bit of a front. Yes, they care about privacy, but like it also helps their business. It sucks more, spend into their ecosystem, just like we've seen it do for Apple, right? Like we have an example in Apple. Apple introduced ATT and all of a sudden more spend went to Apple ads. So like, that's how I was thinking about it. And I felt like they were highly motivated to move off of cookies while people were constantly saying to me, like, nope, they're going to just back off at some point. And I would always just kind of say, you're a conspiracist. Like, we don't need the conspiracy theories. You're crazy. Google is going to get rid of cookies for sure. And I take a huge L on that one. Myles, I think you get a W on this one, right?
I I think so. I just it was apparent that this was going to be a very huge ball of wax going back years, and this is frankly kind of the DOJ's point is you guys Google can't untangle this one thing because it's so deeply entangled with all these other things. So Shiv, like, let's just assume that you were maybe even are right to some extent that Google would want to make certain changes to preference themselves in certain contexts. But the fact is, they self-preference over here and then they disrupt something over there because they're in so many different places. And so it's just very, very difficult and becomes this like hugely multivariate problem to solve for. Where if you make one change in one place, there's like a crazy amount of dependencies that have to be addressed elsewhere. And that's why this has taken like 6 years now.
Yeah.
And this is the result of 6 years as we get into this ambiguous blog post at the end.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like at a certain point, they're like, okay, well, self-preferencing ourselves would be nice by moving off of cookies. But then we open up all these other cans of worms like antitrust and people being pissed off at us and, blah, 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 blah. Is that worth it? And like I said earlier, the math just isn't mathing anymore, especially because the privacy movement has slowed down. And so yeah, I agree with you. Okay, we're gonna go to the soapbox segment soon. So I'm gonna ask people in the audience to raise their hand if they want to speak. You're gonna get somewhere between 30 to 60 seconds. We're still figuring out the format to say your piece. And then I'm going to mute you. But we want to get the audience involved. Before I do that, and you guys get your gears turning and raise your hand if you're interested in speaking. Myles, the last thing I want to bring up um, before we go to the audience is, everyone's talking about the potential Chrome spinoff coming out of the search antitrust case. And I guess what's the angle there? Like if Chrome gets spun off, do we go back to privacy sandbox and do we go back towards like third-party cookies are turned off by default? We're back in this world of like signal loss and we got to deal with all this crap, or like is it quite the opposite?
I, I don't profess to be like to follow Google's antitrust struggles closely enough to have like a really well-informed opinion of this, other than my gut, whatever, tells me that the DOJ, whoever, will have to pry Chrome from Google's cold, dead hands. I don't see them spinning off. I would see them selling off a lot of other stuff before they got rid of Chrome. It's difficult for me to kind of like see Google's future as a consumer facing company without Chrome.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, if you're to stack rank the important assets to Google in terms of priority, it's their owned and operated properties. It's YouTube, it's search, obviously, maps, et cetera, et cetera. And then you could say Chrome, Android kind of are next in line that are really, really important to them. And then you get to the dredge of ad tech,
And
yeah.
the last thing I'll say on that is that maybe Google's opportunity with Chrome is if they are going to be whatever painted into a corner, forced to spin it off, that'll take years. And so they've got years to migrate us all onto the next thing. It's just like we didn't use browsers, 30, 40 years ago. We may not use browsers in 5 years.
It's Gemini, Myles. Gemini.
It's right. It could be Gemini. They could just, get us all onto another consumer technology.
Remember when Google had like 18 brands for AI? I forget. Like that wasn't that long ago. I'm glad that now it's just kind of Gemini. That's good. Okay, let's get to the soapbox section here. So we want you guys to jump up and Give us your thoughts. We want it to be interesting. We want it to be spicy. We want to hear from you. So, which brave soul in our audience here wants to get up on a soapbox for 30 to 60 seconds and talk about what's going on here? Anybody?
I'll jump in. Why not?
Myles, you got 60 seconds. I will mute you if you go.
It keeps confusing me too because he keeps saying Miles, and I think it's me. It's not. I'll take less than that time. I think that I was in the camp of you, Shiv. I thought for sure they're going to do something, and then I slowly transitioned into Miles, where I thought that they're not going to do something. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I think the industry has mostly moved on beyond this. Most browsers have already deprecated cookies. Chrome's going to keep them. BFD, people have moved on. There are solutions that are out there. It's not a really big story to me.
Man, that was like way shorter than
Yes, you got 35 seconds left.
I grant it to somebody else.
That was everybody. That was Myles Brim, product lead, strategy at Yahoo. Thanks, Myles. All right, who's next up on their soapbox? Raise your hand or come on, Aaron. Aaron, did you want to say something?
Sure, I'll chime in. I think that, whatever happens here, it doesn't matter. The consumers, the people who are visiting the websites, they want privacy. And there's a movement out there for that. I've already written about this. They're going to go forward and change their browsers, or they're going to install ad blockers, or whatever's going to happen. This doesn't really make a difference. It'll delay it. It'll make it more complicated and more confusing. It'll allow a lot of operators who are already shifty and untrustworthy to more easily lie about the effectiveness of their targeting solutions. But at the end of the day, the people who are viewing the ads don't want third-party cookies. And they'll push to make laws happen. They'll push to make changes happen at the federal level and at the state level. And they'll make changes in how they browse the web, be it AI, which I'm not really thinking is going to happen, but definitely at the level of their browser. I don't think it's all going to switch to them talking to websites via a chatbot, but I think their browser will shift. And when it does, they'll shift towards whatever option gives them more privacy. Apple's out there doing that marketing because people are buying on it, and they'll keep buying on it. And now Google can't say what they were saying before about that.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? I'm going to extend your soapbox time. That's a fascinating opinion. I actually think I disagree with you, but that's okay. That's why we're here to talk. So you're saying the majority of people believe in privacy and care about privacy. You think regardless of what Google is doing today, the privacy movement will continue either through, political, lobbying or, through privacy advocacy groups. And Google is actually going to take a hit because they're making this decision because people are actually buying on privacy. That's what you're saying?
Yeah. There's exactly that, right? Like there's I've talked about the idea of like privacy marketing. A lot of these companies are out there marketing on their privacy features. And when you look at that, you should take it as a signal that it's because consumers are buying on privacy features, right? Chrome has a big advantage for sure. But I don't think it's inevitable. I don't think what we're looking at the web right now, your shared window is a Chrome window, is it? Right? Like there's a lot of people building new browsers and getting people excited about moving off of Chrome to other things. I think the end of third-party cookies is inevitable, whether Chrome does it or not.
I really enjoy how you just called me out for not using Chrome. Thank you. I appreciate that. I disagree. I respectfully disagree. I think the powers that be in the corporate boardrooms or whatever are saying like, wait, people are not buying enough on privacy anymore, and this just isn't worth our time. That's what I believe to be happening, but we can agree to disagree. That's why we're here. So I respect your opinion. Okay, who else is going up on the soapbox? David?
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's probably not overly controversial, so I don't know that it counts for soapboxes. But maybe it's the opposite view to what Aaron was just said. Part of me thinks it amounts to ultimately a yawn. Ironically, for all the ink that's been spilled over the last 5-6 years, all the work that's gone into it, but the amount of energy, and at the same time, Google. Partly they may have been forced into this by some of the stuff going on in the courts, but this was at least fairly well considered decision, at least, this latest one, to backpedal yet again on this. And Yet at the same time, I think there's probably a lot of people within our industry who are like, hey, that makes continuity of business, makes it much easier. And consumers, there's a, I have a gut feeling that the number of consumers who really care one way or the other about whether there's third-party cookies or not, or even it's got to be. So it's almost like, in spite of everything, it's a big yawn.
Yeah, agreed on that. Okay, let's get to the last section here, which is what we want everybody to leave here with, which is a couple maybe light bulb moments or aha moments, or like what to make of all this at a high level, what to take away from the news. So, um, I think I'll say a couple things, then Myles, I'd love to hear from you as well. I think the impact, I like to break this stuff down into like impact on each of the different constituencies in the industry. And so if I think about each of those groups, first of all, the impact on ad tech companies, I think some companies today are rejoicing. There's probably stock prices that are up. It's the Criteos of the world, the trade desks of the world, I bet, that are like pretty excited about this, even if, they invested in ID solutions and alt IDs. I would still imagine, generally speaking, this is positive for cookie dependent ad tech. And then there is ad tech that is out there that literally is building a business around, cookies going away, right? And that's, the ID graph companies and the cookieless, future companies, the context companies. And I think those guys, data clean rooms companies, I think those guys took a hit today. Like I would imagine, the WPP, not WW, WWE, WPP acquisition of InfoSum from a couple weeks ago, like that might have been a lower price tag if this news came out a little earlier, right? Same thing with LiveRamp and Habu. So I think that there's those two groups within the ad tech companies in terms of impact. I think, impact on Google in general. I think Google is doing this right now because it's good for Google, right? So I think this is probably the right move for Google at this time. And I generally believe that to be true. I think this is generally like I think this is generally good news for marketers, but this is where I want to hear what Myles has to think. What do you think about the buy side community, Myles? Like marketers, agencies,
I,
is this good or bad for them? How does this impact them?
I I mean, based on what, little I was able to glean off of like LinkedIn today, and even some of the comments on this call, it just feels like everybody had kind of priced this in. And Shiv, I think this is where you deserve a W, a win. That you called it out. I think you put it well. I wish I could remember verbatim what you said and where you said it, but you articulated that maybe privacy had reached kind of, this broad equilibrium point, meaning that if that happened 6 to 12 months ago, which I agree, it kind of seems to have happened in the last couple of months, certainly the last year, then everybody kind of had a chance to quote price it in at that point. And so a decision like this, um, I bet there's just a lot of people kind of shrugging about it because they had already moved a lot of their targeting certainly off cookies or a lot of other strategies off cookies, and they certainly weren't, you know, putting their entire business on the back of the question of whether Google will or won't deprecate third-party cookies. I think businesses several years ago, there were some businesses that placed massive investments on either side of that bet. But I doubt, I hope, I certainly hope nobody is making that bet anymore. I just don't think it's a bet worth making at this point of like, will third-party cookies survive or perish?
Yeah, and I think, I've heard time and time again, marketers kind of don't care. They haven't cared too much about this topic in the last few years. They've just kind of been like business as usual. Call me, wake me up when this stuff gets like more meaningful and more serious. And guess what? They were right. Like their inertia, let's call it inertia, or their lack of interest, or maybe their foresight, whatever you want to call it. You could call it something good, you could call it something bad. Whatever they were doing, or their laziness, you could, call it that too. Whatever they were doing, they were right. Like there's no real, value in investing a bunch of time and effort and resources and testing all these different tools and solutions and alt IDs and blah, 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 blah. it's a big yawn. So like, I think it's a big W for those marketers today that have kind of been kicking the can a little bit down the road around, addressability, privacy, like some of that stuff. And I know there's a lot of them. I know there's a ton of those marketers out there. So,
If there is a deeply ironic sort of if this is a conclusion, if this blog post represents any sort of a conclusion, there is a deeply ironic conclusion in that the everybody who was slow walking this for the last 6 years, even though they were being admonished not to constantly. Everybody was like, "You have to be proactive about this." And I was also one of those people. The people slow walking it were totally. They were right.
it pays to be lazy. It pays to have inertia. That's the takeaway. Okay, with that, we're gonna close things out. So thank you, everybody. This has been fantastic.